Welcome to the webinar. I see we have people joining us from all over the world. That's wonderful. I'm joining you today from St. Louis, Missouri, and I'm really excited to be talking to you about the results of APQC's benchmarking study on the current state of the HR function. So today we'll look at the current state of HR spending, HR structure, and HR staffing. We have two other webinars based on presenting out these results of this benchmarking study. So on September 24th, I will be sharing on a webinar the results related to HR processes, technologies, and analytics. And then on October 22nd, we will report out the results on HR challenges, strategies, and performance. So this is a first look at these results, and we do have time saved for Q&A and comments at the end of the webinar. But please feel free, if you have questions that are more timely, to submit those, and my colleague will jump in and we can get those answered in a timely manner. So let's jump in. The benchmarking study that we're talking about today, we designed at APQC to answer a range of questions that we were receiving from members related to the HR function. We had 300 HR leaders representing enterprises from across regions, across industries, completing the survey. They completed the survey in early 2025. Now, to participate, an individual needed to work at the HR director, senior manager level or higher, and they needed to be able to respond to questions about HR across their entire enterprise. Excuse me. All participants represent organizations with 500 million or more in US dollars. So as we reflect on the survey results, I think it's important that we keep in mind the environment that today's HR function operates in. It's one that's characterized by business pressures, technological disruptions, and an evolving workforce, an evolving work world. Some of these characteristics, which I've listed out on this slide, are emerging trends, such as AI. Others are longstanding challenges that are growing more acute. So this would be things such as the magnitude of uncertainty in the world, in the business world today, and the pace of change. One key, takeaway thinking about this context for HR is that the business requirements for HR are expanding. Another key takeaway is that HR's potential to contribute to the business is broadening as new technologies yield new avenues for the practice of HR. So with this context in mind, let's look at our survey results. We'll start looking at the state of HR spending. So for half of HR functions, spending is at a standstill, with the remaining HR functions split between spending cuts and spending increases. Looking to next fiscal year, roughly 1 in 3 HR leaders anticipates that HR spending at their organization will increase. So this would represent a small uptick next year in the number of HR functions that are increasing spending. To put these findings into perspective, we also asked HR leaders whether they think that their HR functions are sufficiently funded. 60% of HR leaders told us that they do not have sufficient budget to meet business needs. With only 1/3 of HR functions having increased and 1/3 planning to increase HR spending, as we just saw on the last slide, it appears that many HR functions are struggling to keep up with inflation, with changing and growing business needs, and to deal with spending freezes or cuts. So I want to turn and look more specifically at how this HR budget is being spent, because that will provide us with more insights on what the overall current state of HR spending is today. So at the median, the organizations in our survey spend half, 50% of the HR budget on personnel, 15% on systems, 15% on outsourcing, and 20% on overhead. So overhead refers to expenses that cannot be directly tied to a specific HR process. So examples would be facilities costs, office supplies, or internal chargebacks for services such as services from IT or finance. At 20% of HR spending, overhead expenses represent one path for dealing with insufficient HR budgets because careful management of overhead expenses could free HR budget to be directed towards higher value areas. Another way that we can look at HR spending is by process group. At the median, HR functions are spending 20% of their budget on recruiting, 15% on training and development, and 12% each on strategy, rewards, and analytics. Then there's another 10% of spending going towards employee relations, and 8% for redeployment and retirement, and then 8% for employee communications. So what this is showing is that the greatest proportion of HR spending is devoted to the talent acquisition and the talent development process groups. And these are two areas responsible for securing the workforce capabilities needed as AI and automation change how work gets done. So in addition to spending, our study also looked at HR function structure. So I want to turn now and talk about those results. So most of the HR functions in our survey are either centralized or they have a mix of centralization and decentralization. So centralization allows an HR function to more efficiently and effectively deliver services across an enterprise, and it does this by leveraging economies of scale and enterprise best practices. Now, a mix of centralization and decentralization allows large, complex global organizations to reap the benefits of HR centralization while also having the ability to adapt to and to address local regulations, as well as business unit or function specific HR challenges. So, in addition to level of centralization, the design of HR function roles can also support efficient and effective HR practice, and in doing so, help the HR function deal with that heightened scrutiny of the HR budget, heightened focus on what the potential ROI will be for HR expenditures. So we asked HR leaders to tell us how staff are allocated across HR roles. So at the median, 38% of HR staff work in HR shared services roles, 22% are HR generalists, 20% are HR business partners, 15% work in corporate HR, and then 10% in HR centers of expertise. So for those who may not be familiar, HR business partners advise business leaders and managers on the talent strategy, the design and delivery of HR programs and services. And in doing so, they draw upon expertise from HR centers of excellence. So HR centers of excellence specialize in HR process areas such as talent acquisition, talent development, workforce planning. Typically, each center of excellence is responsible for process and program design within their process area and for using their expertise to support the work of HR business partners. And then HR Shared Services handles the administrative and transactional aspects of HR using centralized and standardized processes. So together, these roles help HR functions realize economies of scale in HR administration, spread HR best practices across the organization, and position HR to play a consultative role in working with business leaders. So HR staffing trends by process group follow a similar distribution as what we saw a moment ago regarding HR spending trends, with recruiting and learning receiving the greatest portions of HR staff. Now, the benefits that a structure of an HR function can bring to an organization um, really depends on two things: having role clarity as well as collaboration. So you can have the best structure in place, but some of the execution elements can limit the benefits. So I want to talk a little bit about this. So,
Melissa?
yeah, sure. Go ahead, Megan.
We have a quick question to help understand the difference between HR shared services and corporate HR and then the Center of Excellence,
Sure.
like the main differences there.
Yeah, sure. So, these are aggregated survey results. So not every organization has every one of those elements, but corporate HR is often the HR leadership who is setting that broader strategy. And from there, you may have centers of excellence. So you may have a center of excellence focused on talent acquisition, and they're translating that broader HR strategy from corporate HR into their strategy for talent acquisition and determining the processes, designing, talent acquisition policies. And then HR business partners typically are embedded in the business and have strong relationships with the business leaders. And they are working through whatever challenges, it might be a recruiting challenge, for example, that the business leader has. And as needed, they are pulling expertise from those centers of excellence. So I hope that helps a bit. HR shared services tends to be where administrative work that may have traditionally been performed by an HR person embedded in the business, they pull some of that transactional work into a centralized center that can specialize in that administrative transactional work, so that HR business partners or even HR centers of excellence can focus on higher level, more strategic HR issues. So I hope that helps. So, um, so obviously a follow up to the question. So let me just go, again, the follow up question is the difference between HR shared services and HR centers of excellence. So again, HR shared services centers tend to pull administrative and transactional work and centralize it. Often organizations will start with certain process areas. So they might pull employee benefits or compensation related work into a shared services center, and then over time they may pull more processes. They may pull the administrative elements of recruiting into that centralized center to deliver those services. And then a center of excellence would be a small group of experts who focus on a particular HR area. They're typically focused on higher level strategic work, setting what those processes should be, what the best practices are. We are seeing a trend as organizations mature in their use of shared services of trying to pull more advanced, less administrative maybe work out of either the HR business partner role or centers of expertise. And so that's a kind of a frontier that is still being explored by some of the more mature organizations who've had HR shared services organizations in place for a while. Okay, so I hope that helps. If not, I'm happy to, follow up after the webinar and talk more about this particular question. So in terms of role clarity, clearly defined and delineated HR roles, responsibilities, and accountabilities, they prevent duplication of work, and they help ensure that important HR tasks are not overlooked. Our survey results show that roughly 1 in 3 HR functions has clarity around HR roles and accountability. So, as with role clarity, as I mentioned before, collaboration can also drive HR efficiency and effectiveness. 1 in 3 HR leaders told us that their HR functions are highly collaborative. So when combined with the findings from the last slide, these results point to an opportunity that many HR functions have an opportunity to increase efficiency and effectiveness by better delineating roles and responsibilities, and by breaking down silos that limit HR collaboration. We also had HR leaders rate the overall effectiveness of their HR function structure for meeting broader business needs. So I want to share those results with you. Just under half reported that the structure of their HR function is greatly or extremely effective, and over half said it is moderately or less than moderately effective. And I think deficiencies in the area of HR role clarity and HR collaboration could be a factor in these lower effectiveness ratings that we're seeing for some HR functions regarding their structure. And perhaps not surprising, given what we just saw on the last slide about the effectiveness of HR function structure, we found that a majority of HR functions are currently restructuring or planning to restructure. So, in speaking with our members and looking across our HR research studies, we see HR functions restructuring in a variety of ways. So, I just want to share a few examples with you. Um, One way is shifting more HR process groups and higher level HR work from HR business partners or centers of excellence into HR shared services centers with the intent of freeing up HR business partner time, for example, to perform more consultative work with business leaders. So we talked about that just a moment ago. Automating transactional and straightforward tasks to make room for the HR shared services staff to take on that more complex work. So, removing some of that transactional work from their place by using automation, and then standardizing HR processes across an enterprise. So, structure, including level of centralization, the roles that are used, and how roles are carried out, are important when it comes to HR performance. Also important, though, is the staff who are performing these different HR roles. So I want to take a look with you at our survey results on HR staffing. Okay, so in terms of staffing levels, just over 1/3 of HR functions increased the number of full-time equivalent HR employees last year, while over 1/3 made no changes. So to put these findings in perspective, we also asked HR leaders if they think their HR function is sufficiently staffed. And 67%, or 2 out of 3 HR leaders, told APQC that they do not have the number of HR staff needed for their HR function to perform well. And only about 1/3, or 1 in 3, HR leaders expect the number of HR staff to increase over the next year. To meet business needs, it's critical that HR not only have enough staff, as we're talking about here, but also that these staff possess the necessary capabilities. And so our study looked at this as well. So I want to turn and show you what HR leaders had to say about the skills possessed by their HR staff today. So, just over half of HR leaders reported that their HR staff possess the necessary skills to a great or extreme extent, while just under half reported that their HR staff possess the necessary skills to a moderate or less than moderate extent. So, roughly half of HR functions are lacking in skills to some degree. So, let's turn and take a look at what skills HR staff are potentially missing based on our survey results. So we asked HR leaders to identify the top 5 capability gaps in their HR workforces, and they most commonly cited HR expertise and technology as deficiencies. So why might HR leaders see their staff as lacking in HR expertise? As their work is automated. HR staff need upskilling to prepare them to perform higher level work, such as using analytics to identify solutions to business critical talent challenges. Another potential reason relates to how HR functions are developing their staff. So let's take a look at what we see organizations doing in this area. So despite the spending pressures that we looked at earlier, HR functions are indeed investing in training and developing their staff. The most common offering is early career HR development, and this is followed by HR career paths, competency models, and then job rotations. Among the least common offerings or investment is in HR leadership development. So we see that fewer than half of HR functions offer leadership development for potential HR leaders, and then fewer than half offer leadership development for current HR leaders. So for HR functions seeking to outpace the competition and responding to business pressures, technologic disruptions, workforce and work changes, leadership development is going to be critical for HR. But even with these kinds of investments in HR talent, it's going to take some time for HR to see a payoff. So I want to talk about where HR leaders see the overall effectiveness of their staff today. So half of HR leaders said that HR staffing, so this is in terms of numbers as well as skills, is effective for meeting their business goals. And this leaves another half saying that their HR staffing is moderately or less than moderately effective. So I think these findings paint a picture of an HR function that is pressed to upskill and reskill in order to leverage technology and related changes to HR roles. And findings also point to the need for many HR functions to look at whether they are doing enough to develop HR staff, in particular as HR staff move through the different stages of their careers and take on different roles within the HR function in those careers. Okay, so this is kind of that was kind of the overview of our main findings related to structure and staffing and spending in the HR function. I want to kind of sum this up into some key takeaways, and then we're going to also look at some implications related to this research, and then we'll open it up for questions and discussion. So HR functions today are challenged to manage increasing volumes of work while meeting heightened performance expectations. They're facing these challenges at a time when HR spending and staffing are at a standstill for many organizations and are expected to remain at a standstill for many organizations. HR leaders agree that their HR budgets and staffing are not sufficient to meet the business needs of them today, that are put on them today. And our survey results point to HR function structure and staff development as areas where improvements could help HR do more with less. So, in our next webinar on September 24th, we will look at how HR functions are using process management, technology, and analytics to tackle the challenges and organizational changes that we've been talking about today. But what actions can HR leaders take now to better support the business, particularly from the perspective of HR staffing, structure, and spending? So let's take a look at that. So first, HR can focus on and upgrade as needed its practices for monitoring the overall health of the function. So this might involve collecting data and listening to employees, and this would be both HR staff as well as the broader workforce, applying analytics to better understand HR processes and outcomes, assessing the HR function culture and its effectiveness at supporting today's HR objectives, and understanding HR and workforce-related regulations and ethical standards, in particular as AI becomes a more common tool. HR can also consider where it makes sense to redefine what good looks like. So this could involve setting up HR KPIs, dashboards, and benchmarking in ways that help HR answer the question, are we competitive today? Are we still competitive? It might involve establishing a continuous improvement team within HR, fostering a continuous improvement culture, and building a pipeline of HR improvement initiatives. HR can also focus on doing things the right way based on what it's learning from monitoring of HR function health, and redefining where needed what good looks like now. So this could involve identifying areas for HR process improvement, distributing HR work and standardizing HR workflows around the latest best practices for productivity and efficiency, building HR business cases, setting performance baselines, and monitoring progress, as well as measuring impact, and defining modes of collaboration and establishing norms for HR staff interaction. And then finally, where making changes to how it has always done things, HR can communicate across the function the why, as well as the what's in it for me of these changes. So this could involve communicating the why and what's in it for me around upskilling and reskilling HR staff for AI. It could involve adding the context of why and what's in it for me to HR documentation and knowledge base content. Excuse me. It can leverage HR communities of practice and HR experts to communicate these messages, the why, the what's in it for me of HR related changes. And it can invest in leadership development for current as well as potential HR staff to ensure that they have the knowledge needed to model and support the kinds of changes that are needed for the HR function to keep up. So this brings me to the end of kind of the presentation of the survey results. I'd like to bring my colleague Megan back in and take questions that may have already come in. If you have not submitted your questions, please take a moment to do so, or comments. While you're doing that, on this slide, I've included links where you can register for the upcoming webinars related to this research. I've also included additional resources that APQC members can access to learn more about the research findings. And finally, I want to share that APQC members can be on the lookout for our upcoming HR Blueprint for Success report, which will explore the practices of top performing HR functions. So, all right, Megan, what questions do we have so far?
Well, I've been able to answer some of them as we've gone along. We did have a comment from Nicole that Gartner research also shared that the #1 barrier to HR transformation is lack of role clarity amongst the function. So, knowing that, only I think it was the third, had clarity on what their roles and accountabilities were is important. We just had another comment on the links to the future webinars. I did post them at the very beginning of the chat if you want to scroll through, but I'll also copy and paste that in. To someone who had asked about if the benchmarking was global or US, and I let them know it was global, but if you are an APQC member, those collection links that Elissa shared on that Learn More page also has some different breakouts of demographics if you want to dive further into looking for your specific peer group. that can help you get there if you wanted to look at more of the globing. But the research presented here was our full cross-industry report of all of our respondents. So let me go ahead and copy that down, but keep sending your questions. Let me copy the webinar links again. For those
So
that
as you're doing that, I just saw the question, will these numbers roll out to PCF benchmarks? Yes. So the benchmarks that I shared with you today, as well as a wealth of other benchmarks that we collected in this study, excuse me, are tied to the processes in the PCF. They're aligned with standard measures that we collect in other studies as well. So great question there. Another question, Megan, I'm seeing, is there any insight into AI agents and the implications on staff or which areas of HR? This is an area that we actually have another study we're in the midst of analyzing and reporting out for you on. It is the impact of automation on HR functions as well as HR staff. I think one of the interesting findings so far that we're finding, and this is really initial results, but is that efficiency and being able to make better data-based decisions are really the drivers behind automation and using AI among organizations that we surveyed. And what I found interesting was that at the bottom of that list are reducing HR costs or reducing HR headcount. And that does align with what I hear when I'm speaking with HR leaders. A really major concern is preparing their HR staff to transition into different higher level roles or new ways of working with automation and AI, as well as data and analytics. So the focus is on that learning as well as that big change management piece. That's what I hear more about than, a focus on cutting costs or headcount. Not to say that that's not part of it ever, but it's not what our results are showing as the top motivators, and that aligns with what we hear from our members.
The next question is if there's any specific input on strategies that HR teams are using to actually upskill the HR staff.
Yes. Again, future studies are coming out with additional information. I think a lot of I guess really interesting finding from these additional studies that we'll be reporting out shortly is that when we look across functions in an organization, the HR function is showing up as last in terms of its maturity in using automation and AI. So I think we're at earlier stages, and so I think a lot of organizations are planning, how they are going to make that transition with their staff. I think what we saw today is that and we've seen last time we did this study in 2021, a lot of focus on early career HR development, which is great, but that it's falling off after that. And I think it's going to be really important for HR functions to build more robust development that includes, the upskilling and reskilling related to AI, and have that for the mid careers and even the leadership roles.
Okay, next question. In the broader HR structure, are there any trends in terms of other functions being merged into HR to reimagine HR roles?
So a couple of things on this one. One is that we definitely, in terms of, I talked earlier about HR shared services maturity, and as organizations have more experience and more established HR shared services organizations definitely are seeing a trend towards merging that into global shared services centers, so shared services centers that also include things like finance or IT or supply chain. So that is a trend that we are seeing. And then what is it? Let me location. Can you read the first part of that question again? Because I feel like I missed something.
Sure. In the broader HR structure, are there any trends in terms of other functions being merged into HR to reimagine HR roles?
Gotcha. The second piece I wanted to share there is just increasing formalization and focus on organizational culture, as well as change management, and having those as part of the HR function, as well as continuous improvement. So having actual kind of teams within HR that focus on those issues, which very much I think is probably aligned with the kinds of changes and transformation that HR is looking to make with the emergence of AI capabilities and automation.
And a follow-up question to that, someone has commented that there were talks to merge HR and the IT function, and is this already a trend? I've seen some headlines talking about that, but I think it's more about the partnership, right? And how they can partner to work together.
Yes, for sure. I also, have seen that mentioned. It's not showing up in our survey results, but I don't know that we've really overtly asked enough about that maybe so far. Definitely in my conversations with members, that's not something I'm hearing about. But like you said, Megan, our survey results, as well as my conversations with members, very much point to just how critical today, in ways that it hasn't been before, for there to be a partnership between IT and HR, and that partnership needs to be started at that strategic level, and then kind of follow through all the way to those tactical decisions. So I think these departments are probably more intertwined than and will be than ever before.
Are there any other questions before we conclude today's webinar? I think we've hit all of them so far. One more. Are there benchmarks on structural ratios related to HR operational teams as well as centers of excellence?
So yes, so we looked a little bit at that data earlier, but we did ask organizations to show us how their roles broke out. How much of their staff is devoted to operations versus centers of excellence. We also asked, not exactly from a benchmark metric perspective, but we also asked in the study about the focus on strategic versus administrative work, and where companies are at on that journey that many have been wanting to advance on in terms of doing more strategic and making a more strategic contribution to the business. So those are there. You can find those results in the survey reports, the other reports that we linked on the earlier slide, and everyone will receive a copy of our slide deck. And we will also be talking about these in particular when we get to our strategy webinar, which is in October. But those results are also, if you don't want to wait, are also available through those collection links that we have on that earlier slide.
Perfect. I don't see any other questions coming in. You can give it just a few more seconds, but I think Elissa, we've answered them all.
Okay. All right. Well, let's start wrapping things up. As I said, you'll receive a copy of the slides and the recording in a few days. I'd really love it if you would take a moment to take our webinar satisfaction survey, in particular, because we will be doing 2 more webinars based on the survey results. So looking to provide you with what you're looking for and meet your needs in those upcoming webinars. And we have links here on how you can register for upcoming APQC events and access our previous webinars on demand. Also have a link here where you can learn about our 2026 conference, APQC Connect. And please feel free to reach out to us if you have further comments or questions about this research. We'd love to help answer them. We'd love to hear just your thoughts on these findings and what else we should be asking, as we continue to study some of these issues. So thank you so much for your time today, and I hope to see all of you on September 24th.